YouTube live streamers. He's the only guest that joins us from his wife's closet. And you got to turn the camera on for just 5 seconds. There we go. It's okay, David. You can come out of the closet. Oh man, I love this guy. He is the current sitting master of my lodge here in Washington, D.C. And if you're going to do an episode on Irish Masons of the 1798 Rebellion, you reach out to Worshipful Brother David de Hosson of St. John's Lodge, number 11 of the Grand Lodge of Washington, D.C. Welcome back to the Craftsman Online podcast, Brother David.
Well, thank you very much, Right Worshipful. As always, this is an exciting opportunity. I always love chatting with you. I know this is our third podcast. It is an honor and a privilege to do this, so thank you once again.
And as I mentioned, it's my favorite guest who joins us from his wife's closet, because he's also, when he's not Worshipful Master and raising two great boys and just being involved as an awesome dad and Mason and federal employee, they also foster a ton of dogs at his house. So that's literally the quietest place in the room, right?
Yep.
What's the current dog to human ratio at the house?
Yeah, it's 2 to 1. 2 to 1 right now.
Gotcha.
Yeah, it was 4 to 3 just last week.
Gotcha. And as we note in this podcast, things may change. So as I started in the beginning, I benefited not only from having Worship Brother David as the master of my lodge here in DC, who is an Irish American. And that was one of the things that I wanted to kind of talk about a little bit before we get into the subject here with why this is so special. You stood up and gave a wonderful presentation in our lodge a couple years ago on Ireland and Freemasonry, of course, around St. Patrick's Day. But could you just tell a little bit about your story about being a first generation Irish American? You know, I got to meet your older brother at your installation and just hear the story of your family coming to America.
Yeah. So we emigrated then in 1980. So my mom is American and my dad was Irish, and you know I'm American because of my mom. But you know, so my brother and I we were born in Cork. You know, came over when we were little kids. And being Irish is just, it was something I was, you know, it was continually instilled in us as kids and something to be proud of. And especially, you know, I was probably an early teen when I was last asked, you know, about having an Irish accent. So by like 13, I really kind of completely lost it. But you know, it's something we would always go back and visit family. So my grandfather was a Mason in the in Cork, a lodge there under the, I guess, Provincial Grand Lodge of Munster, the Grand Lodge of Ireland. And my dad just decided not to become a Mason, but you know, always hearing stories about my grandfather, his experience, especially when he passed, and some of the brothers of his lodge looking out for my grandmother, a widow, and her son. You know, just it made an impact on me. And you know, in college, I actually started to learn about. It was right around the bicentennial, so 98, of the 1798 rebellion, and article. I mean, there was just a ton of academic work in Ireland and in the States about this rebellion. And really, like, article after article touched on the role of Freemason lodges, in kind of getting wrapped up in one way or another in this rebellion, and just kind of the worldview of Freemasons, kind of informing what happens from the very start. So that actually it was back 25 plus years ago, where it started to kind of plant that idea of becoming a Mason. You know, my grandfather was a Mason, like I said, but kind of hearing about, you know, kind of the activism of Irish Freemasons, it got me interested. And I just kind of put that on the shelf for really many years. But yeah, so being Irish is something I'm proud of. I wore a saffron kilt then at my installation. Um,
And the hat. What
so
was the hat?
yeah, so the hat is a caubeen, the little cape, just a traditional hat that has a history going back centuries. So yeah, and I only wish my dad could have been there,
Mm,
but it was just something. I wanted to make a point of showing off my Irishness, in during my installation as master, and of course and I take that very seriously, but it's again like that history of Irish Freemasonry, which really kind of informs part of my whole perspective here on being a Mason and now a master.
absolutely. Yeah. And before we hop into Doc Brown's time machine, because we are going to literally be going everywhere, all the way back to 1798, but we're also going to go back to December during your installation, because it ties into, as you talked about, like the pride, the passion, and the patriotism that exists in your family coming over to Ireland. I do want to talk a little bit about your military experience as well, and
Oh,
where that has
sure.
taken you throughout the world. But I wanted to touch first on one of the special gifts. And we always talk about how St. John's is a family lodge, because literally, if you go back to the lineage of our lodge, we had brothers and family members, fathers and sons that were serving as masters at some time. And then most recently, our current lodge secretary, Worshipful Brother Anna Trivedi, is your brother-in-law, and presented you with a very special gift as master that brought a tear to your eye that evening. Can you tell us a little bit about that unique gift?
Yeah, so worshipful brother Trivedi and my sister-in-law connected with the Grand Lodge in Dublin, and they were able to dig up the records about my grandfather, when he was raised, and just all the documentation and proof of him being a Mason. And they framed it all, a whole bunch of documents, and yeah, it was very powerful to actually see that, because that was something, as we would say, I put on the long finger that always wanted to look into, um, but just never kicked off the process, I guess, between our grand secretary and that grand secretary. But uh, worshipful brother Trivedi and my sister-in-law did all the legwork, and so yeah, it was just an amazing gift, and just to
Mm.
have that connection to my grandfather, his masonry, and just seeing him being referenced as a master mason, it was very moving for
Yeah,
sure.
I thought it was the coolest thing ever, because we just thought they were going over there to drink beer and watch Steelers football in Ireland, and they
Yep,
came back with
yep.
this
I
fantastic
totally,
gift. Yeah, but
yeah,
then
totally floored. Yeah,
the look on your face when you saw your grandfather's handwriting on the line of the ledger of the lodge that he signed as a Mason,
yeah,
and now being young and hearing these stories, but now having gone through that yourself as a master Mason, and then hopefully as a worshipful master of the lodge, bringing in a new brother this year to our lodge, you'll see how
yeah.
this tradition and the fraternity will continue.
Yeah, I mean, this is something, we're more than just a social club, and there's this mystical body that we're all connected to, and this is something that goes back hundreds of years, and so for me, there was that personal connection, but also the connection to the wider Masonic community, our brethren in Ireland, in England, beyond. So the internationalness of it, if you will. So for me, that there's that personal connection, but also it's like that connection beyond our Grand Lodge, beyond our lodge. So yeah, very just amazing, amazing.
Mm. So I've often joked on the podcast that you have to be a little bit of a history nerd to really enjoy the Masonic experience. So get ready to nerd out with us, because that's what this episode is going to be all about, the history. We actually have a former history professor who's now the master of his lodge here in DC to talk about this. And we've examined Freemasonry kind of as a fraternity at a very high level, at least here in America, as it was perceived back in the beginning, the founding of our country. It was kind of a fraternity, an organization for elites. The higher end of society would be a part of it. What was Freemasonry like in Ireland during this important time in our in humankind?
Yeah, no. So, right, Wishful. So, I do want to preface with the fact that I was a history teacher, but I'm not a professional historian. If any of your listeners take any issue with anything that I put out, A lot of what I'm going to talk about, I even have a list of sources that we can provide, but a lot of this is coming out of, again, that bicentennial period of academic work. Jim Smith, Sean Murphy, Kevin Whalen, Nancy Curtin. I have a whole list. Thomas Bartlett, who I had the privilege to meet, Kevin Fagan, but also our fellow Masons who did the work here on Masonry in Ireland in the 1700s and earlier. Larry Conlon, he was a worshipful master. The late Larry Conlon, worshipful brother Conlon, was a master of a lodge in Dublin. But I'd say the one Mason who has done an exhaustive amount of work here is worshipful brother John Craig Little. He is the current provincial Grand Inspector for Antrim. He's written 3 monographs on some of the things that I'm going to talk about this evening. Amazing work. So I definitely recommend checking his stuff out. So Masonry in Ireland. So there is the Grand Lodge. We all know the Grand Lodge of Ireland. It's established in 1725. At least that's what we're led to believe. What actually happens is Richard Parson, the first Earl of Ross, he's installed as the first, well, or he's installed as a Grand Master in 1725. Now, that is taken to be the start of the Grand Lodge, but there's no documentation that says that the Grand Lodge is established 1725. It's just taken as such because there's no surviving documents beforehand. What we do know is that um, Parson is installed because supposedly his family had a deep connection to Freemasonry. So that's why he's installed as a Grand Master. But we're actually probably looking back at Freemasonry, well, even in its speculative form, predating 1725 by many years. And we know that from what was going on in Northern Ireland. But after 1725, there's just this huge explosion in really a burst or several bursts of and expansions of lodges across the country, really kind of coming down from Ulster, taking root in Cork and Dublin. So there's these bursts in the 1740s, the 1750s, especially in the 1780s. There's a movement, the volunteer movement. Part of that is supporting the Parliament in Dublin, pushing for further reforms, greater parliamentary independence, trade reforms. Those are attained in the 1780s. But this volunteer movement, it's basically militias that were formed during the American Revolution as defense in case there's a French invasion. And um, each of these militia units, these volunteer units, has its own lodge, kind of what we see with the British Army. These traveling lodges, British Army units that would have a traveling lodge with them, typically under the Irish Constitution. So it's again that 38th Regiment of Foot in New York, that British Army unit under the Irish Constitution that actually initiates our brother, worshipful brother, Prince Hall. But so there's this huge expansion in Ireland. So these volunteer unit militia, lodges. Then in the 1790s, there's a further expansion. Part of it is the kind of the political dynamic in the country at the time. But by the early 1790s, there's 94 lodges in Antrim alone, 46 in Down, but many hundreds across the country. The interesting thing, though, is that it really includes so many Presbyterians, Church of Ireland Protestants, but Catholics. So our Presbyterian brothers formed the majority of lodges in Northern Ireland, but across the South, in Cork and Dublin especially, Catholics, Roman Catholics, provide many lodge brothers into the community. So I don't have the exact percentage, but it's typically understood to be fairly significant across lodges in the South and the East. So it's Masonry in the 1700s is, multi-denominational, cross-sectarian, and it really kind of it informs some of the political energy. We'll be talking about that, but it really kind of shows, ultimately it's that brotherhood of man under the fatherhood of God, just all these different faiths, or really Christian denominations, within the same community kind of interacting. And it's probably one of the few spaces where men of these various faiths, of these various churches, so Presbyterians, who are sometimes during this time referred to as dissenters, Church of Ireland Protestants, and Catholics, they're engaging together in dialogue and communion, community together. And it's not happening really anywhere else in Ireland but Freemasonry. Hey, right, Wishful, I lost your audio.
Always helps when I turn on my mic. That helps. I think as a fan of history, you're going to be familiar with this phrase that if we don't learn from history, we're what?
Gonna
Do
repeat it.
We're doomed to repeat it, yeah, and or some variation
Yeah.
of that. And as I'm hearing you talk about this and the buildup of lodges and men who are seeking masonry and becoming Freemasonry and or Freemasons, and Freemasonry spreading and sharing and integrating into all of these parts of society, the military, the government, just the common person, right? And I'm sitting here going, what was going on in the world? There was something major that was going on in the 1700s. There was this big movement of independence and freedom and kind of the breakup of the colonial system and the imperial system that we're kind of used to now. What was it like specifically that kind of led up to this 1798 rebellion that was happening in Ireland? Like, what was that? And what was the outcome of this?
Yeah. So it's really the Age of Enlightenment. And now the main group uh, behind the rebellion, it's the Society of United Irishmen, the United Irish Society, aka the United Irishmen. Um, they're sometimes referred to as the children of the Enlightenment, but so are Freemasons. So it's all these ideas of liberty, freedom, republicanism, small r republicanism, but you know, seizing, or at least having a seat at the political table, and having a say in policy, in the social and political, cultural affairs of what's going on around you. So you have in uh, in Belfast. So Belfast at this time in the 1700s, it's not the industrial city, the shipbuilding center of the 1900s. It's the home of the linen industry, and that's set up by French Huguenots, Presbyterians coming in from Scotland in the 1600s. And of course, they're bringing speculative Freemasonry with them. But Belfast at this time, it's um, unlike the capital. Now, Dublin is a true European cosmopolitan capital at this point, but I would say Belfast is the heart of the intellectual movements of the time, especially radical, what liberal, but what would be called radical thought. And you have the great works of the Enlightenment: Voltaire, Diderot, Rousseau, all of whom are Freemasons, funny enough, all coming in and circulating around bookshops in Belfast. And I would say that the population in Belfast, and it's really because of that Scotch Irish population, it's hyper literate, well read, connected to the affairs going around the world. So they're reading the latest news, what's available on the American Revolution, the French Revolution, uh, the rights of man, that bringing an end to absolute monarchy in as it took root in France, but fighting for independence and freedom, fighting for individual liberties. all of this is kind of informing political discussions in Belfast, especially, and it's influencing Freemasons. Um, Ben Franklin is hosted in Belfast. He's also hosted in Dublin in the early 1700s, but it's when he visits Belfast, he's welcomed. And now this is actually before the American Revolution kicks off, but he already has that reputation preceding him. So he is welcomed with open arms as someone who's also concerned about liberty and the rights of man. And of course, also a Freemason. So just really, really interesting stuff. Um, you know, but it's really uh, it, those Freemasons in Belfast, and part of it is like, so Freemasonry really, it's kind of operating alongside of debating circles and political salons and social clubs. So it really, with these many hundreds of lodges that took root across the country, it really becomes just a part of society. So many men, again, all faiths are, joining lodges because it's also that kind of mutual benefit and relief society. But it's bringing community, and there are community activities associated with lodges. So it's just kind of part of the social fabric eventually. So, I'll say that a lot of Freemasons played a really kind of key formative role in what happens in 1798. Part of it is because they just, these are men who are Freemasons because Masonry was just part of Irish society, especially urban society. And, there are irregular lodges too. Um, it's believed that one of these other groups, it's an agrarian kind of self-defense group, the Defenders. It's believed that they may likely have been an irregular lodge. They're kind of based on a lodge system. They have a grand master, numbered lodges, a very secret society. So kind of modeled on Freemasonry, and probably to the extent where we could call it a regular. But so there's regular and irregular Masons kind of interacting in the society, part of kind of the kind of political ferment, all of
Mm,
these radical ideas circulating again, especially in Belfast, but really closely following developments in the revolution in the late 1770s, up until Yorktown, definitely keenly watching events as they unfold in the late 1780s in
right.
France into the early 1790s.
Yeah. No, I was just thinking about that because, like, I think our Revolutionary War, as we celebrate America 250 this year, it's a very timely conversation. I think it was what 1793 was. Just let me just double check that I googled that correctly. Oh, no, 1783. Sorry, 1783, according to Google, is when our Revolutionary War ended. But then we went through this whole struggle of trying to stand up a federal government and get a constitution with Bill of Rights and all of these things passed. And I mean, that took another 10 years after that. But as you kind of had mentioned, I don't want to say the fallout, but the bloom of independence and liberty had definitely shot off. And I remember reading about one of my favorite stories, the Polish prince. Uh, gosh, what is his name? It's impossible. Thaddeus Kosciuszko. There we go.
Yeah,
It just
yeah.
rolls right off your tongue. That guy, good old Thaddeus Kosciuszko. One of my
We could
famous,
just call him Thad.
Thad, yeah. Thad, one of my missing Masons. He never became a Freemason, but he was best friend to George Washington and Thomas Jefferson before his passing, and just this amazing guy. And yet his action involved with the American Revolution spread, and he went back to Poland, and it did what he did. And so I'm sure, like all of the rest of the world, as you're saying, is watching what's happening here, and America again is influencing the movement of other parts. And then on top of that, as you said, is like also this uniqueness of Freemasonry. And what is Freemasonry? It's a safe place, so to speak, and it has been for millennia for men to come together to get enlightenment, but also connect and grow as a person. So as you kind of talked about and we're familiar with the story of the stone and the operative Freemasons, the practical builders, and some of this was still happening with the Scots and the building of the temples and the buildings that were happening there. But then you also had just the different type of Masons where you had these very passionate, strong Irishmen, as you're saying, who were able to bring in all of these different religions and cultures under their banners. Like, what what is your sense of what Freemasonry was like during this unique boiling point? Like, what do you think they were talking about in lodges?
Yeah, no, it's really interesting. So, just a little background here. So, in really medieval Ireland, that's where we see traces of operative Masons. We know they were there because, as Worshipful Brother Conlon noted, we find their marks,
Mm,
operative Mason marks on Cistercian abbeys in Louth, in Meath, and elsewhere. And if you remember when I spoke at Lodge a few years ago, I talked about the Ballsbridge Square. So this is a square that's unearthed at the bridge. It's under the northeastern pier in 1830, and it actually, uh, bears writing in English. Um, I will live. I will strive to live with love and care upon the level and by the square, and it also bears a date of 1507. So
mm.
it's in English, archaic English, and there's it's believed this is authentic, just given the chain of custody. I think Limerick Lodge number 13 ends up holding it, I believe, to this day. Um, and so we see operative Masons at work in Irish society, but then it's really the Scottish influence. So this, after the 9 Years' War, the plantation of Ulster in Northern Ireland, you see this massive influx of Scottish settlers, those who become Scotch Irish. And by this point, they're speculative. Any Masons are speculative Masons. So a lot of what we talk about, the transition, at least in this context, from operative to speculative Masonry, it's happening in the 17th century, actually late 16th, 17th, early 17th centuries. And we know this because they wrote it down. The most famous example is the Lodge of Edinburgh, number one. And so that's the oldest continually operating lodge in the world. Their records go back to 1599, but they note that, so this is an operative lodge, and they first opened their doors to non-operative Masons. They refer to them as gentlemen on June 8th, 1600. So we have it documented, at least in the context of Scotland, where operative Masons kind of opened their doors to non-stonemasons, regular people. And um, we see this elsewhere, kind of in what are actually kind of like I guess they're referred to as the corporations, the craft corporations. So at the same time, so these are probably the closest thing to like a modern, union. The unions of stonemasons are also bringing in non-stonemasons into their craft corporations. So separate from the lodge system, kind of, but parallel to it, the same thing is going on in Scotland. Um, so you have this, one thing, James the First, the first king of really a unified Britain, coming from Scotland. He is made a Mason by his own literal stonemason. We think of the King James version of the Bible. This is that same King James. King James the First is made a Mason by his own stonemason, literally,
Hmm.
and becomes a fellow craft. So probably the first British monarch to be a Freemason. So Scott, a Scot who speaks Scots Gaelic. And another thing worth pointing out. But anyhow,
Jeez.
all
So
these
much so
Scottish,
much is going on here.
yeah. So a lot of Scottish settlers are coming in, bringing speculative Freemasonry with them, and they leave their mark on
Hmm.
grave sites, on furniture. You'll see the square and compasses on gravestones, but also on tables and chairs.
Mm.
Um, and of
So
course, there's many famous lodges. There's one, Lodge 257, the Orange Lodge. This is completely separate from the Orange Order, to be clear. but that's a famous lodge. It ends up after 1798. Um, it merges with another lodge, 182. But that a lot of the Freemasons who get involved with the United Irishmen are coming from that same lodge.
Hmm.
Interestingly, some of the crown figures who crush the rebellion are also coming from that same lodge. But so Freemasonry is a part of life in Ireland, um, but again, predating the Grand Lodge.
Right.
Jonathan Swift. So, just one quick point: Jonathan Swift has a friend, John Jones. He writes this piece called the Trinity Tripos, and that refer this. So this is in 1688, many decades before the Grand Lodge, and he actually refers to Masons at Trinity College, and he referred. This is classic, I think, but it shows Irish Freemasons are all classes, all backgrounds. He refers to Masons as gentlemen, mechanics, and porters. So
Hmm.
working men and aristocrats. So it really is probably different from what we see elsewhere in Freemasonry. But it's men of all classes, meeting on the level. And I thought that was really interesting. But one thing too that you see, in the 16 and 1700s, aristocratic men, maintaining diaries will leave very cryptic notes. Today I was made a mason, and that's it. There's no other reference. So you just see
Hmm.
this again and again. So again, it's just part of life in Ireland. It's not part of our life in Ireland in the same way today. But certainly in the 1700s, it's just part of the social fabric. A lot of men are masons, and it's the thing to do, if you will.
Fascinating. And so a couple things got me. So first of all, was hearing a lodge number 192 or whatever the number was. I was like, wow, they even had 192 lodges at this point in time. Like that is
Yeah,
fascinating. Like, you
hundreds.
you just
Yeah.
wouldn't think there'd be enough people. I mean, they needed more lodges. But then second, when you said King James became a Mason, and you had, I started thinking about at that time, you had Catholics and Presbyterians and, religious extremism and secularism was a big thing. They neighborhoods were separated by where you went to church, and families would have a chapel or a place of worship at the end of their block because they couldn't go to the other people's church at the other end of the street because they didn't pray like we did. And here yet you had Freemasonry that was kind of, as we like to say, kind of that cement that bonds and holds the fabric of everything together. What was so special about that? Why did we kind of become this collection point where people who were being discriminated by others because they might have been minority or new were coming together and being able to form these really strong bonds?
Yeah, no, it's fascinating. Again, these are spaces where men of all faiths and all classes are meeting together. I mean, all these social barriers,
Mm.
societal barriers are just breaking down. But it really starts in Belfast, where you have, the kind of social activism among Freemasons. Some of them, um, work for kind of social justice efforts, but also they're anti-slavery. So huge um, push among Freemasons, especially in Belfast, abolitionism.
Can I
And you
can I ask
see
you
them just get involved.
Can I ask you a question about that? Because you talk about Belfast in your notes as like it's the literary and intellectual center of Ireland. And for those of us that aren't from Ireland, and I'm assuming most of our podcast listeners are, we've heard of Belfast, but we know Dublin is like the official capital of Ireland. So why was Belfast so significant at that time?
Yeah, again, it just becomes it is a middle class city. So you
Hmm.
have weavers, merchants, again that Scotch Irish core of the city that is taking shape, and again just hyper literate. People across all classes are just reading the latest coming out of publishing houses. There are
Hmm.
publishing houses in the city, and again, Dublin is that cosmopolitan capital. It's just not, I think, the center of kind of liberal thought, the way we think of it. And again, Freemasons in Belfast, especially, many of them are coming from New Light Presbyterianism. which is even to this day kind of more um, uh, kind of a liberal thread within Calvinism, Presbyterianism. So you have especially these core the core of what becomes the United Irishmen. They're Freemasons. Many of them are New Light Presbyterians, but they're again kind of steeped in this environment of radical political thought. I mean, what would be called radical again at that time, but really talking about democracy, republicanism,
Yeah.
individual rights.
Yep.
They're
Would have gotten
they're
you
they're
killed back
part of
then.
that. Yeah, yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, they're part of that radical. They're just immersed in all these trends that are really kind of converging in the same way.
Fascinating. So, a first here on the Craftsman Online podcast. It's not a first that we've had a sitting master of a lodge that I'm a member of be my guest, but we are very lucky to have the current master of my lodge here in DC, Worshipful Brother David Hosson on. But of course, seeing David's trestle board is like, and in March, I'm going to give a presentation on the Irish Rebellion. And I'm like, oh, you're also going to be doing a podcast episode with Brother RC for that one. But first, in that you were putting together the outline for your presentation, and you've spoke about this history and this subject enough, but we are getting to benefit from you kind of still working through some of your notes on the program, which I'm looking forward to sitting in lodge and seeing. But you do talk about the United Irish Society, and we're starting to build up to this point here. We're getting ready to hit 1791, and the thesis that you kind of shared was that this was fundamentally a Masonic creation, which I thought was a very profound statement. What made the United Irish Society so Masonic and so special?
Yeah, no, great question. So, I think there's really a fairly direct link because you have, these central figures, um, William Drennan, Thomas McCabe, um, Sam McTeer, Samuel Nielsen, Henry Joy McCracken and his father. These are Freemasons who are coming from that New Light Presbyterian background. They're also just kind of tied into a lot of the social activism um, in Belfast, Clifton House, which is a charitable organization, and it still exists today. Um, but I think you know their worldview is partly informed by Freemasonry, but as Freemasons, because they're looking out at the lodge community beyond Belfast, because they are aware, you know,
Mm,
just as we travel among lodges, Freemasons are traveling out. I mean, these men aren't restricted to Belfast. They're seeing the microcosm of Freemasonry, men again of all faiths, and I think that's informing their worldview, like an Ireland that could be, a society where those religious background. I mean, there are sectarian tensions in the north, in the south, across the country. That's why there's this group that I mentioned, the Defenders. They're defending especially Catholic tenant farmers. Um, but there are these tensions, and these gentlemen, see that something else is possible in Ireland. So they look at society and they see all this injustice, and they know, like, hey, something needs to be changed. So I just love this. In 1791, Thomas McCabe, who was involved in especially abolitionism, just he writes to Sam Nielsen, and there's this great quote. I just have to read this. You know, he sees that some sort of group is needed, a reformist group, and so he writes to McCabe writes to Nielsen, we need to form ourselves into an association to unite all Irishmen, to pledge ourselves to our country, and by that cordial union, maintain the balance of patriotism so essential for the restoration and preservation of our liberty and the revival of our trade. So,
mm,
part of this is informed by what they're seeing in America, what they saw happen in the colonies in the what becomes the United States.
right.
Um, liberties as free men, as men of the Kingdom of Ireland. Ireland is its own kingdom at this point. It's worth pointing out. but they see that, their liberties are being tread upon. So
It's, and
William
so
Drennan.
like America like really influenced this, and like the revolutionary, as you're talking, I'm like, this is all like America 250 here, like we're getting all excited.
Yeah,
And it's
yeah.
like you look at like our founding fathers, there's obviously the Masonic connection that was going on there, and so you can feel the spirit and the intent, right? But then there's also, as you kind of point out, is like the way that they organized, that they structured themselves kind of like a lodge, where they were using like secrecy and like a form of how we talk about things like Masonically, like networking and, being careful as to who you should be sharing things with and how you talk about things. And can you kind of touch a little bit about that, of like how we see a little bit of it, of course, like in documentation and in speech, especially if you've ever had to go take an oath of office or an oath to be a member of a jury. There's a little bit of masonry that's kind of present in that moment there. But it's different when you talk about the very conscious decision of like, hey, we're going to try to keep some of the way that our organization operates internally a secret to those outside of it.
Yeah. So, and that's the thing. I was just going to mention a quote by William Drennan, who's a medical doctor, a poet. He's actually the first, on a quick aside, he's the first to refer to Ireland, William Drennan, as the Emerald Isle in his poems. But he writes to Sam McTeer just weeks after this writing by McCabe. And he says to McTeer, Sam McTeer, um, I should much desire that a society were instituted in the city, meaning Belfast, having much of the secrecy and somewhat of the ceremonial of Freemasonry. So these are all Freemasons talking to each other. A benevolent conspiracy, a plot for the people, no Whig club, no party title, the brotherhood, its name, the right of man and the greatest happiness of the greatest numbers, its end. In general, and real independence of Ireland and republicanism, its practical purpose. Oh, its business, every means to accomplish these ends, as the prejudices and bigotry of the land we live in would permit. So, Drennan and these men, they get together, and they actually meet in 1791 at Peggy Barclay's tavern. So typically, Masonic lodges would meet in pubs, taverns, inns at this time. And so they get together. So McCabe, McTeer, Nielsen, and they meet with two other gentlemen. I mean, they're famous in Irish history: Thomas Russell, a British soldier from Cork, and the very famous Theobald Wolfetone, a barrister, Church of Ireland man, barrister from Dublin. He's wrapped up in the Catholic Committee. He's pushing for Catholic liberties and rights. But they get together, all of these gentlemen, with other Freemasons: William Sinclair, William McCleary, Henry Haslett, William Tennant. They're all from Lodge 257, that same lodge I mentioned. John Campbell from Lodge 636, and they form the Society of United Irishmen. Just weeks later, then, William Drennan, meets with James Napper Tandy, another figure famous in Irish history, and Archibald Hamilton Rowan. They're both Freemasons. So Tandy is coming from Lodge number 190. Archibald Rowan, he's coming from Volunteer Lodge, one of those militia units I mentioned. Lodge number 620. They're all Freemasons, and they form basically the Dublin branch, along actually with other Freemasons, Matthew Dowling, John Stockdale. And they form that in Dublin at Taylor's Guild Hall, where also the Grand Lodge of Ireland is also meeting at the time. So
Man,
I wouldn't
it's
say
not
it's all
coincidental
coincidence.
anymore. Yeah.
Yeah. So,
It's so
but
like parallel to what was going on in America just 20 years before this. Like it's crazy.
yeah, no, for sure. Um, I, can I just pause 1 second?
Yeah.
Okay.
Did your wife had to come in and like hang up some stuff in the closet? Or you had to open a door because it was getting stuffy in the closet, no circulation. Oh man,
Yeah, no, sorry,
it's
sorry.
okay.
So,
Just cracks
um,
me.
yeah, so, and that's the thing, kind of looking at the academic work during the bicentennial. Um, so, they, I think, very purposefully look at, kind of establishing this organization, and it's focused on reform, the
Mm,
rights uh, of advocating for the rights of both Catholics and Presbyterians primarily, but it's very self-consciously modeled on the lodge system. So the United Irishmen, they do engage with different artisan guilds, political clubs, but Kevin Whalen noted 25 years ago in his writings that they do purposely engage with Masonic lodges, and um, Jim
hmm,
Smith noted that they considered, as I mentioned, kind of Masonry as this microcosm of the wider society that these men envisioned, just something founded on mutual respect and, breaking down barriers between unnatural, barriers, dividing men. But, they meet on equal terms.
hmm,
And, that's it's purposely, it spreads through the lodge system. It's kind of modeled on the lodge system. Um, Thomas More, the great poet from Trinity College, noted that when someone would be invited to join the United Irishmen, they would be asked to join a lodge. So it's very purposefully the lodge system. It's secretive. The men can be counted on, and you have United Irishmen spreading ideology through visitations.
mm,
Lodges would adjourn, uh, end lodge business and have political discussions, but you would have men using Masonic visitation to spread that.
hmm.
Um, and they would model the oath of the United Irishmen, really on that very really on it would be referred to as an obligation.
Right.
So I think Freemasons too, were just they were kind of targeted just out of the sense of they would have that sense of honor and loyalty among members.
Hmm.
But the United Irishmen would use Masonic events. You know, lodge sponsored sporting events, other assemblies, kind of religious pilgrimages where Masons were involved, uh, and use that to spread the ideas of the United Irishmen, which at this time it's reformist, kind of breaking down the final sets of what were called the penal laws. Limiting the rights of Presbyterians and Catholics in the country. Parliamentary reform. It's reformist, and kind of making society kind of look like Freemasonry, where there aren't these legal barriers preventing men from from success and being part of society and having that seat at the table.
So I know we had scheduled this for an hour. I got a couple more questions if you're cool for a little bonus time. You all right with that?
Oh yeah, for sure.
Okay. Okay, good. Whew, I've got questions. So kind of there were so many similarities when you were talking about the Irish Masons of the 1798 rebellion and our American Revolution back to 1776 and the spirit that was going on. I mean, parallel, where you had key leaders, key members of the craft and key members in American history who were both Freemasons and like-minded, and then they both met in taverns and just the way they organized themselves. You could see that. Unfortunately, the Irish Rebellion did not have the same result as the American Revolution. The rebellion failed. What was the impact of that failure on Freemasonry in Ireland, and has it kind of stayed? Did it permanently change maybe some of the character of Irish Masonry that they got so involved in this key moment in their nation's history?
Yeah, no, it's really interesting because you have so many United Irishmen, and not every United Irishman was a Mason, but there's a large chunk of them that are, and then this other group that gets involved um, in the rebellion, the Defenders, at least part of the Defender organization, which is believed to at least be kind of modeled on Freemasonry. Again, we can kind of refer to that as irregular Masonry. They had their lodge system, a Grand Master, numbered lodges. Um, but you see after the rebellion. So it is this this bloody rebellion, and this group is really pushed into a corner, kind of like what you see, what happened in America during the Revolution, where you have kind of these modest activist groups pushing for parliamentary reform. They're suspected of having French links, some of which are real. At least some elements within the United Irishmen start to have, to engage with forces within the French Republic. That complicates things. So the United Irishmen are made illegal. There's this huge, backlash. It's considered treasonous to be part of this group, which was pushing for modest reforms, the right to vote for Catholics, the right to be a member of parliament, kind of, and I could even list all the limitations of the penal laws. Some of them are, retracted in 1793. Um, Catholics are allowed to vote finally. Um, Part of it being the pressure from the United Irish. They're allowed to serve in the military, but they still can't serve in parliament. So that's a sticking point. Even the right to vote for Catholics, it's incomplete. It's not fully implemented. It's not the reality that it needs to be. Um, but anyhow, it's really the backlash, the by the crown against the United Irishmen. There's the dragooning of Ulster. Men are imprisoned, executed. Their farms burnt down. They're tortured. Pitch capping
Mm,
is rampant, and that's where hot tar is poured on your head and then ripped off. I
mm,
mean, just the group is pushed to rebel in May outside of Dublin in the south, and then in the north in June, um, and in the west in August. It's crushed in. By the time we get to October 1798, it's crushed. Um, you know, Probably about. I mean, estimates vary, but probably about 30,000 people have died.
mm,
About 50,000 United Irishmen had come out into the field. They are crushed by about at least 100,000 British troops brought in. And then there's, Hessians, um, Scottish fencibles, which are kind of like not quite militia. They're regular troops with kind of shorter contracts coming in from Scotland,
mm,
British regular troops, um, yeomanry and militia in the country. The interesting thing about all that, though, is that there is no Masonic conspiracy here. It's Masonry is part of the fabric of society. Men are driven, compelled to activism to fight for the rights of Catholics, especially by their Masonic outlook on the world,
hmm,
achieving a just society that kind of looks like Freemasonry. But it's worth noting there are Masons on the Crown side, I should say. Um, among British Army units, those traveling lodges, Scottish fencibles coming
hmm,
in, even among the Hessians. There are Masonic lodges attached to Hessian units. So there's Masons on both sides of this. And it's, what was meant to be kind of parliamentary reform becomes this, very bloody rebellion. The
hmm,
bloodletting is intense. There are sectarian atrocities on both sides. For me, the lesson here is, these men in the north, in Belfast, Drennan, McTeer, Nielsen, um, McCabe, they're driven, by something, their religious faith as New Light Presbyterians, their masonry, and then, again, being immersed in all this radical thought. but they're trying to create this better world. And that, it was worth standing up for. And of course, the form, everything that happens in 1798, it's sad, this
Mm,
kind of needless bloodletting, when again these guys just wanted to make society better and more
right.
just. But what we see happen in Freemasonry, there are investigations by the Grand Lodge. There are calls to expel all Masons who had been involved in the rebellion. There's about 170 almost lodges that are suspected as having been a part of the rebellion.
Hmm.
Um, those men, those Masons are never expelled from Masonry. And I think it says a lot about the Grand Lodge at that time. Um, well, I think the Grand Master, his name escapes me right now, but he was sympathetic to what would be called Catholic emancipation, full rights for Catholics in this Catholic majority country at the time. Um, so there's that idea of Masons, even despite the fact that they took up arms against each other, and that Lodge 257, men within that lodge fought each other in Down and Antrim, putting that behind them and just getting back to being Masons.
Hmm.
Um, this was like the United Irishmen, putting the past behind and just trying to focus on a better future. But we see part of it is I mean, all Catholics involved are are excommunicated, at least formally. Many Presbyterian ministers are, expelled from the ministry, but it's again Freemasons that keep everyone within the fold. But we do
Hmm.
see Catholics by and large leave Freemasonry. Part of it is the kind of the memories of 1798, the sectarian atrocities, again on both sides. Men are just kind of driven. Being a Freemason is being wrapped up and being suspected of being a political radical at this time. So you have many men just kind of leave just to make just to move on from it. There are papal bulls calling for Catholics to leave Freemasonry. I mean, that starts in the 1790s and continues into the 19th century. Probably one of the most famous figures in Irish history, Daniel O'Connell, is a Freemason, or he was a Freemason. He eventually leaves Masonry, but he was a member of several lodges, a master of another, and he is, at least on paper, a United Irishman. Um, and he brings about, finally in 1829, Catholic emancipation fully, where Catholics can serve in Parliament. So even then, it's a Freemason, or at least you could say a former Freemason, who makes that finally happen. But Freemasonry within the country, it gets wrapped up. You have many lodges across the country kind of requiring oaths of allegiance, many putting out statements in support of the crown. Part of it is self-preservation, but by and large, you see Masonry become part of the establishment. Here, it was kind of a force for radicalism in the 1700s, but by the time you get to the 20th century, it's absolutely part of the establishment. It is kind of seen again as an elite organization. It's sectarian. I mean, sectarian in the sense that you um, don't have men from all faiths across the country involved in Freemasonry. I mean, even during the War for Independence in the early 20th century, the Civil War that follows, you see people attack the Grand Lodge, attack like you know, firebomb individual lodge houses, because it is seen as part of this establishment that is holding Irishmen back and the progression of Irish society. So, um, but I will say it's this rebellion that, for the first time, and there were many rebellions that happened before, risings, but this is the first where Irishmen of all faiths, are united together in a struggle. It becomes a struggle to establish a republic within the country, but that forever informs Irish nationalism. That Ireland is for all her children, not just a select few, the
Mm.
Protestant ascendancy, or even the majority. The Catholic majority in the country. It's for everybody, and
Hmm.
it's the United Irishmen. But again, at its core, the founders, who were all Freemasons, who push that Ireland is for everybody. Um, and I think, even the history, the way it was taught for decades, centuries, a lot of this was forgotten. It was kind of looked at as this primarily a Catholic rebellion against the monarchy, when it really was cross sectarian. It was across all faiths. That, again, the formative part, the originators of Irish nationalism, they're they're Church of Ireland men and Presbyterians in the North, again, good chunk of them Freemasons. So they forever change the future of Ireland. All groups that come after look back at this rebellion as really the start of a new Ireland, for an Ireland for everybody. And again,
Mm.
Freemasons played a formative role in it.
So I guess this is a great place for us to end, because you end, or you conclude, your lodge program on this note. You say, quote, "the effort to reclaim this past," end quote. And so, listening to the story, is this past that you're talking about and reclaiming it, is it the spirit of unity? Is it the combination of, men who are like-minded, who are being bound by different part? Is it the fact that they believed in something so strong and so passionately that they put their lives on the line for it, believing in something bigger than themselves? And even to the fact that they didn't accomplish, they didn't triumph, but they still found a way to survive and in some way keep carrying that flag forward. What is the past that you're hoping to reclaim here?
Yeah, no, and it's funny because at the bicentennial, the Grand Lodge invited the president at the time, Mary McAleese, to visit the Grand Lodge, and they showed a lot of the artifacts still in the possession of the Grand Lodge from 1798. And they, were proud to show the role of Freemasonry, rightly, in the rebellion. And again, like, the lesson is of this, when you see injustice, speak up. When you see, something wrong, whether, and again, these Freemasons, they're speaking out against poverty, they're speaking out against slavery. And then they
Mm.
see the unjust laws in Irish society against Presbyterians and Catholics together, kind of, creating this elite, by taking away the rights of the vast majority together of the country. Um, but yeah, I guess for me, it's, reclaiming that sense of, there was a time 200 years ago plus, and a quarter, where Irishmen were together, you know, in common cause, fighting for justice. It becomes this bloody conflict, but, you know, advocating, at the start peacefully for justice together, an Ireland for all her children. Um, but, uh, but yeah, this is a history that wasn't always freely taught in the North and in the South. And I think only now are people really, thanks to the internet and other sources, where they're really starting to see, like, hey, this is what this rebellion was really about. Unfortunately, it took this path, but it started out this way, where it was a coming together of men of all faiths, men and women. But again, we have and Marianne McCracken, uh, Henry Joy McCracken's sister, was an activist in her own right and involved with Freemasons and abolitionism. So it really is men and women, I should say. But the focus, here being on the Freemasons. But it really is this, everyone kind of advocating for a better society in the country, in the
Mm.
kingdom.
Just fascinating. I mean, I know we could literally, oh, you could literally talk about this all night, and I would keep asking you questions and just keep going and going and going. But uh, our time together must come to an end. And easily one of my
Sadly.
favorite, and sadly, yes, but easily one of my most favorite guests to join me from his wife's closet.
Thank you.
It's a prestigious honor here. Worshipful brother David DeHassen, thank you again so much for your time and the bonus time here on the Craftsman Online podcast.
No, thank you very much, Right Worshipful. I definitely had more to talk about, but we can talk more during my presentation in March. But thank you once again. This was an honor.